Hi, my name is Vesa Juvonen, and I work as a principal consultant in Microsoft Corporation. In this module, we'll cover the steps required to upgrade your 2007 customizations to SharePoint 2010 environment. Microsoft has made a significant investment in this area to ensure that the customizations implemented in SharePoint 2007 would be easily upgradable for SharePoint 2010. We'll start by covering the different options available for upgrading projects which have been created using Visual Studio extensions for WSS project template. Next, we'll go through the variety of different common upgrade issues which are valid for any code or project developed for SharePoint 2007. As a final topic, we'll have a short look at the overall upgrade process, and we'll focus on the tasks needing to be done from developer point of view. So, in this section, we'll concentrate on the steps involved in upgrading Visual Studio project, which has been created using Visual Studio extensions for Windows SharePoint Services project template. This conversion option is available since the structure and the model is standard. If you have created your own templates or use some alternative approach in 2007 development, different steps will be needed to follow. There's a separate Visual Studio 2010 project template available for upgrading project structure to Visual Studio 2010 format. This template is not part of the out-of-the-box Visual Studio 2010 SharePoint tools. It can be downloaded for free from Microsoft Download site, and it's an extension package to Visual Studio. After the package has been installed, you will have a new project template available in Visual Studio, which automates conversion of the project structure. The upgrade tool supports both VB.NET and C# based projects and can be used for projects created with Visual Studio extensions for WSS 1.1 or newer versions. Basically, the tool will convert projects to new Visual Studio 2010 format and will maintain the existing project layout. The upgrade tool will be available after RTM of SharePoint 2010. After you install the package, you'll notice there's a new template available called Import Visual Studio Extensions for WSS project. This similar to implementation of other SharePoint project templates, and the template also supports both full trust and sandbox solution deployment options. One of the steps involved includes selecting which project will be imported, which will also start the actual conversion of the 2007 project and will convert it to SharePoint 2010 project type. This slide illustrates the fact that after initial import of the project structure remains nearly identical. In examining the screenshot, you'll notice that the same structures and customizations are available in both images. In Visual Studio extensions for WSS, each feature had only one artifact or project item. This could cause unnecessary amount of features to be created, which subsequently impacted the overall performance elements in the farm, such as site provisioning. Since Visual Studio 2010 allows you to associate multiple SharePoint project items to one feature, we should refactor our solution structure after completing the initial conversion to 2010. This basically means that you can reassociate your SharePoint project items in a way that you can delete all unnecessary features from the project structure. In Visual Studio 2010, refactoring of the code is relatively straightforward using the new designers for packaging and features. This slide demonstrates the result of leveraging the refactoring capabilities in 2010. As mentioned in a previous slide, you can clean up the project structure significantly, thereby reducing the overall number of individual features. In addition to this, it's a good practice to group SharePoint project items on one of the more or less in conceptual level, so that when you activate one feature, you get all required functionality. This way to ensure that your customizations will work properly on target environment. In this section, we'll cover the common upgrade issues which you might run into while upgrading code from 2007 to 2010. We'll also cover the key improvements in SharePoint 2010 platform to make the upgrades easier. This slide lists most common upgrade issues which you might run into. If you have used site templates in 2007 environments, you'll need to upgrade these in a specific way to ensure that they will work in 2010. Additionally, there are certain things to look out regarding the UI which we need to resolve to take full advantage of full capabilities of a new user experience. To help provide more info on each of these, let's go through these issues in detail in the following slides. When we are upgrading site templates, it's important to note that the original SharePoint STP file format for the site templates is no longer supported in SharePoint 2010. This has been replaced with a solution package format as in WSP package, which is more flexible and supports easier distribution of the customizations between environments. STP files still exist in the list templates. There's no import tool for the site templates, so if you use the site templates in 2007 version, you'll first need to convert the database to 2010 version and save the site as a template in 2010. This can be done, for example, in your development environment by using the database attach option, meaning that you first create a site using the site templates in 2007 environment, take a backup of that database and move it to your SharePoint 2010 development environment. Database can be upgraded to 2010 using a database attach option, and after that the sites are available in 2010. And on that stage we can save the site as solution packages. Note also that the default site templates created in SharePoint 2010 environment are scoped within site level. If you need to provide the same template throughout the farm, you'll need to import the generated solution package to Visual Studio 2010, update the feature scope to farm, and deploy the solution package as a full trust solution. SharePoint 2010 supports legacy user experience to make the upgrade as easy as possible. This means that you can upgrade your SharePoint farm to 2010, but keep the user experience as it was in 2007 environment until you've also updated your master page. If you run in your site in legacy mode, user experience will remain identical as in 2007, but you also are missing some of the advanced functionalities in 2010, since, for example, ribbon is not visible. Therefore, this mode is not recommended to be used permanently. User experience mode can be configured site-by-site basis, which means that you can upgrade the sites in using different schedules. For example, in cases where you have used classical theme sites and customized master page only for root side of the site collection, you can change the theme sites to use new SharePoint 2010 user experience and configure the root web to be used as a classical rendering option. Note also that if you create sites in 2010 environment, they will be by default rendered in 2010 mode unless specific UI version attribute has been assigned for the configuration of the particular site definition. This is important to remember if you have developed custom site definitions. The user experience mode can be configured from the site or in site collection level. At the site collection level, we can choose hide visual upgrade options from all of the sites, or alternatively, we could choose to apply the new user experience to all sites within the site collection. If you apply the new user interface to all sites, the option to reverse this action in the UI is no longer available and you are unable to use it anymore. You can only change back the legacy user experience using object model in that case. If new user experience have not been applied to the site, you can see visual upgrade options from the title, description and appearance site setting page. If you have upgraded your 2007 environment to 2010, this is a default situation, meaning that you would be using the old experience until you explicitly decide to change it. There's also a preview option available, which means that you can see how the site would look in 2010 user experience, but you can still change the user experience back to 2007. This is useful to ensure that upgraded master page is working properly. When you decide to change the user experience to 2010, these options won't be anymore available. After committing to 2010 user experience, you can only move back to legacy mode using the object model, as mentioned already in a previous slide as well. From the object model point of view, changing the user experience mode is extremely straightforward. There's new UI version property available on the SP Web object, which can be used to toggle between the modes. Currently supported values are 3 and 4, which means 2007 and 2010. Preview mode can be configured from the site collection using the UI version configuration enabled property. With 2010, there's new controls available which can be used to differentiate rendering options depending on your user experience mode. You can use the UI versioned content to differentiate HTML to be rendered. If you need to include functionalities depending on a UI version, you can use version placeholder control, which supports adding child controls to it. These controls are useful if you want to, for example, use the same master page in 2007 and 2010 and 2007 UI modes, or when you create a new 2010 master page based on 2007 master page. This way you can use the same master page despite the UI version used. Let's have a closer look on the UI compatibility mode and how we can utilize it to provide similar user experience as in 2007.
In this demonstration, we'll concentrate on the UI version functionality, which we can use to provide the legacy 2007 user experience from the SharePoint 2010 form. This is really a usable solution if you have 2007 customizations and you don't have time to update your master pages to use the ribbon and so on, but you want to actually upgrade to 2010 as fast as possible. Let's start by adding our custom web port to the page so that we are able to switch back to legacy rendering mode. This is a custom web port since the site has been already committed to SharePoint 2010 rendering mode, which basically means that we're unable to switch back to 2007 legacy mode using a user interface. So we have this UI version changer web part, which is manipulating the UI version directly from the APIs. It's actually updating the UI version property of the SP Web, which is really important also in that sense that since the UI version can be configured in a site basis, we are able to upgrade some of the sites within the same site collection to use the SharePoint 2010 rendering mode, and some of the sites can still render in 2007 mode. So at the moment we are using the SharePoint 2010 user experience mode, which is the UI version 4. And there's few different controls placed on the custom web port, which is a visual web port, which is indicating quite clearly that we are using version 4. So if we want to switch to legacy mode, we can update the SP Web UI version attribute to 3, which will actually change the master page and switch the rendering mode to 2007. And this is really, really brilliant when you are planning your upgrades. So it's a valid option when we are upgrading 2007 sites to 2010 and we need to have additional time for the master page updates. So as you can see, we are now running the mode, the user interface in 2007 mode, and it's the full user experience. So not just the master page. So if we actually also try to add, for example, web parts to the site, we can see that we are having the same user experience throughout the functionalities. And this actually also applies the other functionalities as well, or throughout the site functionality. Meaning the fact that if we go, for example, to site settings, we're able to see that the site settings are fully the same as they were in 2007. There are a few new functionalities visible in here, for example the term store management, which is not in 2007, since it's a functionality which we can use in 2010 form. Also in a site collection administration, we'd have new additional settings available. Let's move back to the actual front page and switch the UI version to version 4 preview mode. And this will update the site in this kind of a 2010 preview mode rendering, which basically means that if we have a custom master page, we are able to test the master page functionality, and then if it's not working properly, we can always go the title, description and icon page from the site settings, and we are able to switch back between the different versions. So we're able to use still the 2007 rendering mode, and if we want, we can then go and do the preview again whenever we have updated the master page if there is something wrong. So we can switch the preview mode, go and test our custom master page in the front page of the site. Is it working properly? If it is, we can actually commit our settings from the title, description and icon page. And after we have committed our UI version to 4.0 or 4, basically meaning SharePoint 2010 rendering mode, this functionality of switching back between the versions will be hidden from the title, description and icon functionality. And that's the reason why we created this custom web part for demonstration purposes. So we're able to switch back from the UI as well. So if we have committed to this UI version 4, we are unable to switch back to 2007 user experience unless we access the object model and update the setting. Let's go still back to the front page of the site and have a look on the implementation of the web part and what does it actually do. I already mentioned that we are updating the UI version of the particular SP web object. And based on the button we are clicking, we are switching the UI version either to 3 or 4, and then we have the special case for the preview mode. Basically, we are using the switch UI function, and in here we are accessing the particular web. We're using elevated privileges, which basically just in case if we don't have proper access rights to switch to UI version. And the key code to switch between the versions is actually this one in here. So there's a property called UI version for the SP web object, and we can set that to be 3 or 4. And as I mentioned when we started the demo, it's really important to know that this is an SP web level setting. Basically meaning that we are able to update our existing sites as part of the upgrade process in a site-by-site basis. So we don't have to necessarily update all of the sites to use SharePoint 2010 mode immediately. One other thing which I wanted to show concerning the rendering is few different controls which are available to differentiate the rendering functionality between the UI versions. So we can use the UI version content control to differentiate what are we actually rendering if the UI version is 4 or if the UI version is 3. So this is a control which can be used to differentiate different HTML elements which are rendered. And this is probably something which you might end up putting in your master page if you want your master page to support both of these UI versions. But the difference of the UI version content and the version placeholder is the fact that within the version placeholder control, we can actually have sub or child controls included. In this case, we have the ASP image control, which will be dynamically updated from the code behind of this particular user control. So basically meaning that depending on the UI version defined for the version placeholder, is it 3 or 4, we're updating the image to show the version we're actually using. So the difference of these two controls is the fact that the UI version content is to differentiate HTML and version placeholder control is to differentiate different controls and functionalities which we are rendering in a different UI version mode. Let's move back to the actual UI still one more time. So there's the image and there's different controls and different content rendered in a version 4 mode. And if we switch to version 3 mode, we are showing that we are actually rendering in version 3 mode, even though it's quite obvious also from the UI and the user experience which we're seeing. Concerning the mode still, if we are running in version 3 mode, there are some of the functionalities or the advanced functionalities are not available since we don't have the ribbon within the page. But if the same functionalities which you had in 2007 in your custom master page will work. So there's the page editing toolbar, there's the add a web part functionality and so on. And after you have updated your master page, if it's a custom master page, you can update that to support ribbon functionalities, and at that stage we can switch to version 4. And you're good to go with any advanced user experience functionalities also within the SharePoint 2010.
There has been a lot of changes in the CSS level. This means that most of your existing CSS styling in 2007 won't work in 2010. This is the updated rendering mode of SharePoint 2010. Since 2010, rendering is based on XHTML and is following up accessibility guidelines, many of the CSS classes have been changed. Usage of the table to create page layout has been changed to use divs. This is a good example of the reasons why the CSS has changed dramatically. This also means that any customizations which are dependent on 2007 CSS, such as master pages, will have to be redesigned to work properly in 2010. Especially if we are running those master pages in 2010 user experience mode, which is definitely the objective. It was quite common to have custom actions in 2007 to provide, for example, additional buttons to toolbar. Since we don't have the toolbar anymore, which has been replaced by a ribbon, rendering of these custom actions would not work as expected. There's, however, backward compatibility to show the possible toolbar custom actions automatically on Custom Commands tab in ribbon. If you use server-side code in your custom actions, they would not be visible on the Custom Commands tab. Since ribbon is based on client technologies and does not cause postbacks by default, there's no easy solution for this. This means that you'll need to refactor your code to work otherwise. For simple cases, you can check if similar functionality is possible using JavaScript client object model. There are some controls that were previously included with the default master page that have been moved into the ribbon UI. Because similar functionality now exists inside of the ribbon, if you plan to update an existing master page to ribbon functionality, you need to remove the following controls from your existing master page. A ribbon will provide corresponding functionalities in 2010 version. These controls are publishing console, site actions, and signing controls. There are also a few new placeholders you'll need to add to your master page to make it work properly in 2010 environments. You also need to add new controls which are required, like the SB Page Manager, Script Manager, and Script Link. Without these, ribbon and other functionalities would not work properly. As for the final action, you'll need to modify CSS classes to reflect the new CSS classes and rendering structures in SharePoint 2010. Theming engine has also changed dramatically in 2010. So basically all themes are not compatible by default. This means that you'll need to create new themes which uses the specific themex file format. All themes can still be used if you are running your sites using the legacy user experience. If SharePoint Designer has been used in your 2007 environment to customize some of the customizations you deployed, changed files are located in the content database. So updating the files in file system does not cause the UI to change. This can happen, for example, when you've deployed a custom master page using Feature Framework and it has been customized using SharePoint Designer in specific sites. If you now update the master page and redeploy it to the farm, on sites where the SharePoint Designer has been used, user interface would not be updated. There's basically two options available. You can reset the content back to uncustomized stage, which would delete the changed file from the database and update the file pointer back to disk. Other option is to continue using SharePoint Designer and update the master page manually. But if there's numerous sites where the updates have been done, this can be extremely time-consuming option. SharePoint 2010 introduced a new list view threshold functionality which will restrict querying too large amounts of items at once. This means that if you have more than 2,000 items in a single list in 2007 and everything works properly, you can run into issues in 2010 platform due to throttling. These settings can be managed in application level using central administration application. If you access large amounts of items in your queries, you should refactor queries to use Content Iterator. Content Iterator allows you to query information using kind of paging. This way you can, for example, query a list with 2,000 items using page size of 2,000, which would result additional database queries, but it would be manipulating getting only 2,000 items at once. When working with large lists, you'll need proper testing in your development and testing environments. Remember to test functionalities without using administration accounts, since administrators have different query limit. You should use realistic data volumes to ensure that you're testing with proper amount of data. You can, for example, copy the production database to development environments if possible. As mentioned already in the previous slides, you can refactor your code to use the Content Iterator if possible. SharePoint 2010 adds automatically binding redirections to machine-level configuration files. This way all references are updated at runtime and the code should work even without recompiling it. Since the binding redirections are done in a machine level, not only in the web configuration files, all code executed also outside of the IIS should work. Even though you don't necessarily need to recompile your code and update references, this is nevertheless recommended. This way you can more easily identify possible other issues already in Visual Studio. Numerous APIs have been deprecated in SharePoint 2010. This means that if you recompile your code against 2010 references, you'll see warnings of any affected APIs. Remember though that deprecation doesn't mean that the API is not supported. It means that Microsoft will not invest in these APIs in future, and they will be removed later. Most of the deprecated APIs in 2007 are still in 2010, so a huge amount of refactoring should not be required. This slide contains examples of the deprecated APIs. Good examples are the sp farm create method, which should not be used without passphrase. Also, the sp virtual server object has been deprecated. You should use the sp web application or sp IIS setting objects instead. Note also that since we don't have shared service provider anymore in SharePoint 2010, some of the code has been deprecated. Most of the service-specific code APIs have nevertheless stayed the same. If you, for example, utilized user profile APIs in your code, same APIs are still available to modify the user profile service application configurations and user profiles. Since the default root folder of the SharePoint has changed from 12 to 14, you'll need to update any code which might have references to 12 folder. This is not the case if you have used SharePoint APIs to solve the root folder path automatically, which is the recommended approach. Obviously, if you have hard-coded the path, it has to be updated. There's also changes in the registry keys, which we are using in SharePoint 2010, meaning that if you had some code which accessed registry keys, you should update it. Other issues include possible COM references, third-party dependencies, and registration of HTTP module and HTTP handlers. Whenever you add a reference to COM component, that reference will have an IID, which is stored in a registry and points to that DLL. If reference DLL was 32-bit, you'll need to change it to point to 64-bit version of the DLL. This means that if you, for example, had a third-party COM component in 32-bit environment and installed a 64-bit version for your SharePoint 2010 code, which is the only supported option, project references will need to be changed, and a new interop assembly will need it to be auto-generated by Visual Studio for the projects. You might also have used other third-party components which also have to be fixed and tested case by case. Since you might not have the source code of these assemblies, you might have to refactor your code. It's also valuable to see that is the third-party components anymore required in 2010. There's a lot of new functionalities available which might provide the exact functionality out of the box. IIS 7 has a little bit different registration of HTTP modules and HTTP handlers. So if you had some code which updated the web configuration files using sp web config modification object, you'll need to update the registration code applied to web application configuration files. HTTP handler registration uses new handlers section, and HTTP module uses modules section under the system.webservice configuration. There has been also a few updates on the control locations inside of the SharePoint assemblies. There is type-forwarded to attributes created for all of these new locations, so your code would work automatically without recompiling if you have references to assemblies where the control exists in 2010. Searchbox X is a really good example of this relocation. In 2007 version, the control used to locate in Microsoft.SharePoint.Portal assembly, but in 2010 it's located in Microsoft.Office.Server.Search assembly. So in this case, code would work without any updates as long as you have reference Microsoft.Office.Server.Search assembly. But if if you'd get errors, but you would get errors if you only have reference to old assembly. How do I actually refactor my code? We have mentioned the refactoring a few times. If you have developed any console or Windows Forms applications and compiled them using 32-bit targets, you'll obviously need to recompile the applications. All console and Windows Forms applications should be compiled to use any CPU or 64-bit target and use the .NET Framework 3.5 SP1 as their .NET Framework platform. On start of this module, we covered the steps to upgrade existing Visual Studio extensions for WSS projects to new Visual Studio 2010 project templates. Quite often, though, some alternative method development approach has been used. You can continue using your alternative approach in Visual Studio 2010 as well, since you definitely don't have to use the SharePoint project templates if you don't want to. This is a valid option, for example, when you need to upgrade your code to 2010 as fast as possible without completely refactoring it. It's however recommended to change the Visual Studio projects to use the new templates, since they increase the productivity of developers and bring consistency between projects. When you start converting your projects to Visual Studio 2010 templates, you can utilize the new Import WSB Visual Studio project template to create the initial solution structure to Visual Studio 2010. Importing will create all necessary structures for features and create the initial set of SharePoint project items which have been associated to proper features automatically. After the importing has happened, you have to add all non-package files, like the actual source code and other elements. The following steps is to add the possible missing references to your Visual Studio project and optionally update the code to use non-deprecated APIs. It's also important to note that the actual importing of the WSB package doesn't actually import site definitions or, for example, control templates. So if you have used these elements within your 2007 WSB solution packages, those have to be manually migrated to your new Visual Studio 2010 project templates. Let's have a more detailed look on the phases of upgrading customizations to SharePoint 2010. As a case description, we'll use Contoso Intranet template, which is based on an actual global intranet implemented over SharePoint 2007. This project is an excellent example since it utilizes numerous features, site definitions, custom pages, and numerous APIs, not only the Microsoft.SharePoint DLL, but also it manages or uses, for example, profiles and search assemblies.
In this case description, we will concentrate on Contoso Intranet. Contoso Intranet is a real-life intranet which was developed over the SharePoint 2007. It's a global intranet for corporate communications, but it also supported local intranets. The overall site structure was quite large, and there was a lot of different customizations utilized within this deployment. There was master pages, page layouts, custom web controls, web part features, and site definitions, which actually made this case or engagement as a really good example on the steps how do we actually upgrade our 2007 projects to 2010 platform. As you can see from the picture in the slide, the actual site or the look and feel had been customized quite a lot. And this was due to requirements of the corporate communications, so that the actual look and feel is following up the Contoso Intranet branding. We developed a lot of custom controls and web parts, and as you can see actually from the site, there isn't that many out-of-the-box controls visible, except the welcome control and the my links control. Other than that, most of the site functionalities which are exposed, especially within the front page, are custom controls. And we also developed a custom main navigation control which supported this kind of a tab-based navigation between different functionalities. In this case, for example, the global intranet search and my site. And there was also a custom navigation developed for the left side navigation, which we will demonstrate also shortly. So the upgrading plan of the Contoso intranet was the following. Basically, upload the WSP packages to SharePoint 2010 farm and activate those packages so that the safe control entries are actually added to the web config files, and all of the required feature files and site definition files are actually located in the 14 Hive or the 14 root folder. The following step was to take a database backup from the SharePoint 2007 farm using standard SQL Server enterprise tools, and then create a new database to SharePoint 2010 farm and restore that backup database over that one, which basically meant that within our SharePoint 2010 farm we now had the database or the content database from the 2007 environment. Then we needed to ensure that the farm account and pool account has actually access to that database, and the following step is actually to attach that database, the content database, to whatever HTTP or the web application. In this case it was attached to http upgraded.contoso.com, and the database name, which was already located in SQL Server, was intranet upgraded content. This add content db command actually starts the upgrading of the actual content database, which will basically mean that all of the features and all of the site structures and database changes are applied. So the add content database command actually takes a little bit while to complete. The preserve old user experience is set to true, which is the default value when we are actually upgrading databases from the previous versions. If you would like, you can also define the preserve old user experience to false, which basically means that all of the new sites or upgraded sites are running by default in SharePoint 2010 user experience mode. And obviously the following step is to start testing and verifying that how did the upgrade actually go. As a summary of the actual steps, we can go through the steps more detailed. So we created the 2007 portal using the 2007 solution packages. We took a database backup from the that environment. We installed those WSP packages to SharePoint 2010 farm and activated those in applications to ensure that we have the necessary configurations available. Then we restore the database backup, which was taken from 2007 farm to 2010 farm, attach that to SharePoint, so that SharePoint is actually aware that we now have this new database available. And the following step is obviously to start testing. And here's a quick example still on attaching of the database. So using the STS-ADM, we're able to add the content database to a particular web application. The attaching of the content database as part of when we are upgrading is not supported when we are if we would be using UI. So we need to do this from the STS-ADM. And it will take a while to complete the actual upgrade sequence. So starting the testing of the actual site. We opened up the browser and went to the site, and this was the initial end result or initial result of the upgrade. And as you can see, the site wasn't upgraded fully automatically. There was issues within the navigation, but when I started actually looking closer at the site and the structure, we could figure out that actually all of the content is there and all of the web part functionalities is there. And in this case, actually the biggest issue causing, or the biggest visible issue is the UI rendering, which was caused by a coding issue within the navigation. So the main navigation actually broke, and that caused CSS classes and the rendering of the HTML not to be valid and caused issues within the site. When we went through throughout the site and the structures, it was basically the same issue throughout the sites and the hierarchies. But as you can see, the actual functionalities and even the custom web parts were working properly. So there was no actual changes still done for the actual code. The root cause of the UI rendering issue was actually that the profile property access failed. And basically this was due to the fact that there's new location for the user profile config manager. So the code which we had didn't reference the Microsoft.office.server.userprofiles DLL, which is a new DLL which is available and contains all of the user profile code. And since that reference was not there within the code, obviously it wasn't since the code had been developed in 2007, the accessing of the user profile was not successful. You can, if you remember the user profile namespace and the objects, you can actually see that the object names and the namespaces are the same, but the issue was caused by the fact that the assembly wasn't referenced. Other things to notice, other than the profile access, the code actually worked like it should, even though we didn't actually update the code yet. So the profile object model has been changed a little bit, but other than that, the namespaces and everything else was working actually properly. The site definitions were upgraded without any issues and without any upgrade definition files, so there was no issues with those. This is also, well, the upgrade definitions files were not required since we didn't want it to have any changes within the sites. And they were based on this kind of a minimal site definition approach to avoid any issues with the site definitions. There was one of the things which we had in 2007 was a feature which was responsible of activating the .NET 3.5 functionalities within the web config. That was not anymore required, so we didn't activate that in 2010 form. An additional thing to notice and remember is that the upgrade is only supported when we have Service Pack 2 installed on a SharePoint 2007 form. So you have to take a backup from the SharePoint 2007 form which has a Service Pack 2 installed. Let's concentrate on the actual code and how do we actually upgrade the code itself. So the initial objective was to create the new structures for 2010 based on the new SharePoint project types. And obviously the first step is actually to import the WSP package to Visual Studio 2010. Since that's something, well, there's the project type available for importing WSP packages, and it will actually create the initial structure for Visual Studio project type. So the code fixing process basically was the following, or this was the plan. So importing the existing WSP package, update the package structure, basically updating the feature names and the SharePoint project item names and so on. Add manually the missing elements. Site definitions are not imported by default. For example, the code is not imported at all. Obviously, since within the WSP package we don't have the code within there. Then migrate 2008 code to Visual Studio 2010. Relocate the code files within your Visual Studio SharePoint solution. Fix the references to 14 assemblies. This is actually a step which is not necessarily required, but it's recommended due to the fact that there's machine level configurations which will do the binding redirections for us. But especially if you're using the user profile functionalities, then you need to associate that or add that reference to user profile assembly. Then build and test. So going through the individual steps, starting the import, there's the import project type, then we are defining what kind of a solution is it. If we are taking files from 2007, and especially in this case it was a large customization, we were using the farm solution option. Use the sandbox solution if possible, obviously, but most likely if you are using, for example, control templates or site definitions, you need to go with the farm solution option. Then we move forward within the wizard. We're able to see the preview of the content which will be imported. And then the actual result. So as we mentioned in the deck itself, when we are importing stuff to 2010 Visual Studio 2010 SharePoint project types, it requires refactoring. The amount of refactoring required depends obviously on our project size, but in this case we had 29 features and quite a few SharePoint project items, which we basically would have been start renaming and making sure that the names are correct and everything is working properly. And this is one of the reasons why we actually ended up doing a little bit another approach for this particular case, just for testing purposes. But in real life, we would strongly recommend to start using the SharePoint project types and project structures, since that way every single project is actually developing their code and structures using a similar or same model, which is definitely the recommended option, so that every single project doesn't have their own way of doing stuff and having their own MS Build scripts or using WSB builders and so on. So upgrading the Visual Studio 2010 SharePoint project type is definitely recommended. Some import notes, which we mentioned already. The site definition didn't import at all. No ONET.xml or web template files were actually imported. So how do I actually get them in? Well, you can drag and drop them to the Visual Studio structure. It's relatively straightforward and causes, well, few minutes to do, so not a big deal. But the other thing which we need to be aware is that the solution structure after initial import will require heavy refactoring. So it will take time to rename the features and associate the SPIs. Well, the SPIs are associated by default properly, but if we want to rename those and refactor the structure for making the structure more clearer, then that will require quite a long time. And nevertheless, we need to add the source code and everything else to that structure to make everything compile. So, in this case, since we wanted to use or test the SharePoint 2010 as fast as possible, we actually started using this classic mode. So let's not use the SharePoint project types yet. Let's postpone the refactoring of our solution structure, the Visual Studio SharePoint project types. So let's start converting our solution structure to Visual Studio 2010, which basically means that open up the solution in Visual Studio 2010, start the conversion, which will convert the project file, the solution file, the Visual Studio 2010 format. And then we can start updating the references and doing whatever we need to do to make the SharePoint 2010 work for us. Basically, this approach is using the classic development mode or the legacy development mode, which basically means that if you have, for example, MS Build scripts or targets file included in your Visual Studio project type, they will obviously still work in Visual Studio 2010. So you're able to use a similar structure as you might have been using in 2007. This is the actual solution structure in this case. This is kind of a common way for some of the MCS organizations to set up their projects. There's a lot of different assemblies existing in this approach, but it's kind of a clear approach where we have different assemblies for data objects, application logic, feature receivers, especially for feature receivers, since those are always deployed to global assembly GAG. But for example, the web controls and web parts can be deployed to the bin folder. And then we had the solution structures and the solution compilation included in this structure as well. I will show that as part of the demo a little bit later on. Updating the references, updating the missing references. As we can see from the slide, Visual Studio is telling us what is actually missing, so that the user profile could not be found. The type has been forwarded to assembly Microsoft Office SharePoint user profiles. So these are type forwarder attributes which have been added to previous place of the user profile code, which is now explaining us in a Visual Studio that basically we need to add that new reference to our structure. So basically, what we want to do, update the references to version 14 assemblies, which are the SharePoint 2010 assemblies, fix the issues with the profile property access, which basically meant that include a reference to new assembly, which is the Microsoft.office.share-server.user-profiles.dll. And that has all the code which is actually manipulating the user profiles. And this is something which I mentioned earlier already, but it's something to be really aware. If you're using the user profile code, you need to add this reference to your Visual Studio structures or your assemblies. If you're not, then those code will work as it is actually in SharePoint 2010. Based on the testing and do the binding redirections which have been defined. And when we start compiling and using the code, we're able to see also the deprecation notes. So the SharePoint, the Visual Studio is telling us based on the deprecation notes within the assemblies that certain classes are obsolete and use some alternative method. And these are actually really good texts, and they are explaining what method to use and what object to use. So that's something to definitely update within the code in short term, basically. It doesn't. If some code is obsolete, it doesn't mean that it won't work. It means that within future releases, Microsoft will not invest any work on those, and the actual interfaces might disappear. So it's a good practice actually to update your code based on the deprecation notes. Packaging the new version, so using the old school method, basically meaning DDF files and the manifest files, and compiling that using the makecap exe, so not using the Visual Studio SharePoint project types. And then since we had already deployed our solution packages, we wanted to upgrade the solution, and we used the STS-ADM upgrade solution to deploy new versions of the assemblies and the files. And then voila, the actual site was working properly. And the rendering, the issues were gone, and the site was working as it should. And one of the key points to note is that the site is now working. We didn't update anything within the master pages or within the page layout, since the site is working or running in UI version 3 mode. And when we are running in UI version 3 mode, it basically means that the whole user experience is the same as it was in 2007. And so basically even the site settings and everything else is the same as it was in 2007. And editing or adding the web ports and so on. So this will definitely help on upgrading the existing sites. You should be, however, aware that if we would now start creating new sites of using these site definitions, which are part of our solution package, these new sites would be by default using the UI version 4, unless we have defined the UI version attribute to site definition file. And that's something to be aware. So if you actually want to create additional sites within the site hierarchy, you need to update the UI version attribute also to on a XML file. Let's have a look on the actual Contoso intranet running within the SharePoint 2010 farm. So how does it look, and how does the Visual Studio structure was actually upgraded, and how do we utilize that using kind of a classic approach? Let's have a look on the Contoso intranet in the SharePoint 2010 farm. As we mentioned in the slides, the Contoso intranet is a heavily customized WCM site which is aimed for corporate communications. And as you can see from the front page, there's a lot of different functionalities and custom web ports available for providing this kind of a consistent look and feel for corporation. And within the sites, if we move within the site and site structure, we can see that there's a lot of different functionalities available and different structures available for having the actual content within the sites. The individual text is currently lorem ipsum text, so that all of the real customer information has been hidden. But the Contoso, as mentioned in the slides, Contoso Intranet is using the UI version 3.0, and it means the following. So even if we start editing the page, we are able to see the page in a classical SharePoint 2007 user experience. And the whole experience is the same, despite on the functionality which we are actually using within the site, either web port functionality or customizing individual web ports. And the whole functionality, or the whole UI experience, is the same also in site settings as we saw within the text as well. In this case, the site, there's no way actually of knowing that the site itself is running in a SharePoint 2010 as a platform, but the UI is still SharePoint 2007. Let's move to the front page and let's have a look on the code side. So within the code, as we mentioned with the slides, we're using this kind of a solution structure where we have multiple assemblies. And there's two different solution assemblies, which are basically compiling, using kind of a classical mode for compiling the code as part of compiling the actual project itself. So using the makecap solution. Whenever we compile, for example, the solution resources, we're able to see from the output window that what actually happens is that we're running the solution package and executing the DDF and the manifest files. In this case, the structure is relatively large and relatively highly customized, so there's a lot of different features, a lot of different functionalities available, which will be packaged within the solution packages. And this is definitely one of those really good examples why the Visual Studio 2010 SharePoint project types will help and increase the productivity. Since especially for these larger projects, if we have a look on the DDF file, if you were using manual approach for updating this, there's quite a few lines within the DDF file. Of course, you might have been using some third-party tool, but there's always kind of that requires always learning the tool, and it requires the way to utilize the tool itself. But when we are upgrading our code and upgrading our structures for SharePoint 2010, as mentioned also within the slides, the key point is to ensure that the references are done properly, which basically means that we are referencing the same Office version, Office DLLs, but the actual version of the Office DLL is 14, which basically means that we are using the latest version. And one of the things which we needed to add manually was the Office Server user profiles reference if you are using user profile within your code. After those has been done and the code is configured properly, we are basically able to also use the classic mode for debugging, which basically meant the following. So we can attach to process. And when we attach to a process, we can definitely automate this using, for example, some Visual Studio script. But basically what it means and what the Visual Studio 2010 is doing for us, it is attaching that particular web application v3 vp.exe process to make the debugging possible, which basically means that in our case, if we refresh the page, our breakpoints are also hit if the code is compiled properly, and you're able to actually go through the actual code and so on. So even though you don't necessarily upgrade your Visual Studio structures immediately to use the SharePoint project types, you can definitely utilize the SharePoint 2010 as long as you update the references, and you're basically good to go. And definitely you can use this classic approach, but we recommend to convert your Visual Studio structures to SharePoint project types in a short term as a short-term task, since that way every single project will be easier to adapt, and when people are switching between the projects, they can more easily start developing using the SharePoint 2010 structures. And definitely there's additional value within the Visuals tools for SharePoint 2010 as well. But nevertheless, as we can see from the upgraded contoso.com, upgrading of the actual site and the actual code is relatively straightforward. There's definitely a lot of the things which we need to be aware when we are upgrading the hardware and the databases and everything else, but the actual code is upgrading relatively easily. But we have to remember to test and verify every single deployment and change which we're basically doing, just to ensure that we're not causing any issues within the production environment. So, what about the following steps? Now the site works relatively well. Within this case, the existing master page haven't been actually upgraded. So we can the following step would be to upgrade the master page, add the ribbon in, and add a few additional content placeholders in to make the master page actually work in SharePoint 2010 or the UI version 4 mode. And one of the kind of discussions concerning the master page development is that should we actually update the existing one or create a new one, and that's something which have to be kind of considered case by case, since we can use the UI version controls. There's the specific controls available which can differentiate even controls which are rendered depending on the UI version. And that's definitely one option which would actually give us an easy way to upgrade some of the sites, the UI version 4, and use the UI version 3 within some of the sites without even changing the master page itself. But that's case by case kind of a decision which has to be done. But whenever the new master page is actually available, we can use the UI version 4 preview mode to make sure that it's actually working properly, and we can test the ribbon functionalities and all of these advanced functionalities which will come available when the ribbon is actually within the site or actually rendered within the UI. And when we have tested and verified that the master page is working properly, we can commit the changes within the site collection level or within the site level. So it's basically up to the case. And well, in this case, it's a global communicational intranet, which is using the same master page throughout the same site collection, throughout the multiple site collections actually. It would actually mean that whenever the new master page is available, we would commit the changes, which basically means that we are committing the UI version 4 when the changes are done and tested properly. As a quick summary, how do we actually upgrade the stuff, or what were the steps, the minimized steps to make the Contoso intranet code work in SharePoint 2010? We want to ensure that the 2007 form is in Service Pack 2 level. We update our customizations for SharePoint 2010, update the references, add the references to user profile assembly if required. Then we deploy those WSP packages to our SharePoint 2010 production form or testing form. And then we basically attach the SharePoint 2007 database, content database to 2010 form, which will upgrade the database. And then start testing and fixing. The initial time for solving the steps and solving the issues which we ran into was a little bit took a while, but when we done this, when we know these common mistakes and based on the code which we have, the actual code upgrade from 2007 to 2010 doesn't take that long, and it's relatively straightforward. And you can definitely do these steps, for example, within even your development environment, which is running in SharePoint 2010 mode or running SharePoint 2010. And you can copy, for example, if possible, even the production database for testing purposes within the development form to kind of have your real data for creating the actual master page for SharePoint 2010. And then when everything has been tested, verified, make sure that everything is working properly, then we can test the same thing in the quality assurance, hopefully, and then in the production. Just making sure that we're not causing additional issues within the production farm.
One nice improvement for the customization upgrade troubleshooting is also the improved logging. When you upgrade your environment, there will be a better visibility for possible issues encountered. Logs are located in the ULS folder, which means the same folder where the trace logs are stored by default. This is the logs folder under 14 root folder. There's also visibility on upgrade actions from central administration application. You can see the details concerning the upgrade and which log files contains additional information. This also applies not only to initial upgrade from 2007 to 2010, but when you update your existing farm or full trust solutions to a newer version as part of your application lifecycle model. These are examples of the logging done as part of the upgrade. As mentioned in the previous slides, logs are stored within the logs folder under the 14 root folder. There's a separate detailed log concerning individual actions performed during the upgrade and a separate log for possible errors. On the example on the slides, there's warning in the error log concerning some features which is referenced in the slides, but it seems to be missing from the new 2010 environments. This is a screenshot from a central administration application concerning details shown of the upgrade. Notice how we provide additional information for specific upgrade sessions, which includes amount of errors and warnings, log information, and which commands were used to start the actual upgrade. In this section, we'll concentrate on the actual upgrade process. We'll focus on a developer-oriented actions to ensure successful upgrade. Ignite IT Pro training material contains additional information for administrators. As we saw from the previous slide, upgrading your code is relatively straightforward, since in certain cases you don't necessarily have to even recompile it. There's, however, numerous other things to consider for upgrades, which we cover in following slides. You should always test your customizations and process before applying those in production. You should have a separate quality assurance environment which can be used to verify all actions to be performed during the actual upgrade. You should also use database backups from the production environment so that you have sufficient data volumes for your tests. If you use virtualization, you can easily move back to the previous stage if something went wrong during the upgrade actions. The actual upgrade cycle or actions can be divided to 5 phases, which all have important actions to be done. We first start by learning the proper way to upgrade. We obviously need to prepare to upgrade by collecting details concerning the environment and make the necessary updates for our customizations. During the testing phase, we ensure that the changes applied to our customizations are working properly, and we now have the exact steps to perform during the actual upgrade in production. In the implementation phase, we perform the actual upgrade. As a final step, we'll also need to validate the environment and perform possible actions to resolve any issues encountered. Obviously, we want to minimize the risks to find any issues after actual upgrade by doing proper testing as early as possible. Let's have a more detailed look on each of these phases and what we should concentrate as developers. During the learning phase, we'll need to ensure that the environments are based on the requirements and decide the proper upgrade methods to take. We usually used method is the database attach, since that way we can, for example, keep the old 2007 environment up and running in a read-only mode during the actual upgrade and validation phases. This way we can also minimize the actual downtime. As a developer, we'll need to concentrate to solve any missing dependencies and decide the model for user UI changes. As mentioned previously in this presentation, we can still keep to the 2007 user experience if the user interface changes for 2007 user experience have not been done. If we want to take use of 2010 user experience, we'll need to learn how to do the required UI changes. Documentation is really important to ensure that we are aware of all different environmental variables in our environments. As the developers will need to identify and collect all customizations used in all 2007 environment and make them upgradable. We also need to ensure that our customizations have been deployed properly to environment so that we could use the same solution packages possibly also in 2010. If you have manually installed any features or other SharePoint artifacts, these need to be included in solution packages. Depending on your customizations, most of the web parts will, for example, work as they are in 2010 environment. We need to, however, be aware of the, for example, of the XHTML rendering in 2010. Meaning that if your custom web parts don't render HTML properly, you'll have issues with the user interface. Site definition upgrade depends on site definition usage. All out-of-the-box site definitions will upgrade as they are. Most of the custom site definitions will also be fully compatible with 2010 environment, especially if you have minimized the definitions in actual ONNET.xml file and used associated features to provision the customizations. During the testing time phase, we concentrate on finding any issues as early as possible. You should ensure that you have sufficient amount of time to identify and especially fix any issues encountered. It's much more cost efficient to test properly and avoid issues in production rather than solving the possible issues in production environment after actual upgrade. You should also document and test the actions to be performed in a production environment during upgrade. If possible, similar hardware should be used for testing environment as well. Meaning that if you have, for example, multi-server farm in production, you should test with the multi-server environment. More the testing environment resemble production environment from a hardware and software point of view, more reliable testing and testing results we get. During the actual upgrade element implementation, we'll need to ensure that our customizations are properly deployed and available for actual upgrade actions. You should always use solution packages for deploying your customizations to SharePoint farm to ensure that all servers are in sync. There are also several other concerns which are more or less for the administrators. These include, for example, how to minimize downtime for the upgrade and also how to what's the fallback plan. We'll need to have a clear plan on the steps to perform if the upgrade fails. So how do we actually fall back to a separate environment, and what are the following steps to continue? After implementing actual upgrade, we'll need to validate the environment. This can be done by checking information from event logs and especially from the upgrade logs. If you have any issues, you'll need to fix them and restart or resume the upgrade. Since there have been a lot of changes in user experience, most common issues are there. Depending on your approach, you can use the previous user experience by updating the UI version of the site. You might have also issues with costing. This means those files which have been modified within your production environment using SharePoint Designer. There might be also issues concerning the actual data with, for example, orphaned items. One of the difficult things to validate after the upgrade is hidden column data. With this, we mean the information in lists which are not visible from the UI. There's numerous columns in each list which are hidden. Most likely there will be some third-party tools available in futures to check this hidden column data and compare the upgrade results. Since there has been also changes in authentication, you might run into issues in that side as well, and especially if we have a data connectivity to possible external systems. If you have done your testing properly in your quality assurance environment using content databases from production, you should be able to identify most of the possible issues encountered as early as possible, so that we can avoid those in the actual production environment. That sums up our module. We first took a look on the steps to upgrade Visual Studio extensions for WSS project templates. After that, we took a look on the common issues you might run into within your customizations and how to upgrade projects which are using some alternative approach than extension templates. As a final topic, we had more kind of an architect discussion concerning the actual upgrade process and which kind of things you should be concentrating to mainly from customization point of view. Thanks for your time, and hopefully this presentation was useful.